Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2024 Waste Management Phoenix Open Initial Research Show. Even though Pebble Beach has been delayed to a Monday finish, if they finish at all, that's not going to stop Calls from previewing next week's tournament in Phoenix at TPC Scottsdale. So we got a fun show for you all. We're going to be looking into a little bit of the research and looking at a little bit of the metrics that matter for TPC Scottsdale, the players who have played well historically at TPC Scottsdale, all of that good stuff. Do want to hear from you all. How is your Pebble Beach going in terms of wagers or DFS? Do you have Wyndham Clark? Perhaps you have Ludwig Aubert. How's your DFS going? Do you have a lot of the players at the top of the leaderboard? So I want to hear from you all. But we are here for the Waste Management Phoenix Open. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight, every night, are from FantasyNational.com. It is the best golf analytics tool out there for your money. There are a lot of great tools. Don't get me wrong. I simply believe Fantasy National is the best. Go check out FantasyNational.com. You will not regret it. In the description to the video, there are links to all of the social media. First off, my X and Instagram, where I post research weekly on the PGA Tour. That will come out tomorrow regarding TPC Scottsdale and some course history, prior winner patterns, all of that. So if you want to see the weekly research that I do on the PGA Tour, then give me a follow at your preferred social media site. X is also where I place my weekly betting cards and my top player usage or player exposure each week in DFS. So if you want to see those pieces of information, give me a follow over at X. And then lastly, for social media, Gabe's social media handle is in the description. He writes a very good article called The Fringe. It's a great way to start your week of preparation, and he continues to give you information throughout the week in his own form or version of recent form, course history, all of that. And if you are a subscriber to his article, which is free to do, by the way, you're going to be able to join us in his Substack chat every Wednesday evening for or to continue the DFS talk after calls. So show Gabe some support. Follow him over on social media. Subscribe to that article. Again, lastly, we're live. Chat's open. Want to hear from you all. On top of all of the Pebble Beach stuff, whether you have Wyndham Clark or somebody that's close on the leaderboard, your DFS, what do you think of TPC Scottsdale? The greenest show on grass, as they say. Who do you think has the upper hand? What do you think plays well here? All of that good stuff. So let's do our initial research for the 2024 Waste Management Phoenix Open. And we're going to start with the GCSAA tournament fact sheet. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer here. This is last year's GCSAA tournament fact sheet. I imagine that with Pebble Beach having been suspended, they haven't gotten around to finalizing the waste management yet. But not much, I believe, will change for TPC Scottsdale. But I do want to let you all know that this is last year's GCSAA tournament fact sheet. We're in Scottsdale, Arizona, at TPC Scottsdale, the stadium course. TPC Scottsdale is a par 71, measures 7,261 yards, so right about in the middle of our short or long filters. So nothing to do with course length in terms of filters this week. The stimp you see there listed at 12, generally speaking, that is fast, and that is historically what the green speeds are here at TPC Scottsdale. They're generally fast. TPC Scottsdale, originally a Tom Weiskopf and Jay Morris design. It was renovated fairly recently in 2014 by Tom Weiskopf. So a lot of research will go around from the renovation forward tomorrow. But anyway, in terms of TPC Scottsdale specifically, these greens are pretty large, 7,000 square feet on average. Not a lot of undulation, not a lot of slope to them. They are large, they're protected by bunkers and water. As we skip ahead here, 6 holes with water in play. Now there's only 3 water hazards, but holes are maneuvered around those lakes and ponds, if you will. 70 acres of rough, so not a whole lot of rough on the course, and it's not very penalizing to be in. It's not punitive. 27.5 acres of fairway. These fairways can be difficult to hit at times. The greens, they are listed, at least last year, as Poa Trivialis with rye overseed. I have seen a note that they are Poa Trivialis purely this year. Now, I can't confirm that with no GCSA tournament fact sheet, so I will be interested in seeing that tomorrow when the GCSA tournament fact sheet comes out. I was hoping it would be tonight, but such is life. So what we can do is look at Poa Trivialis and rye overseed this evening. There is a chance that we're going to be looking just at Poa Trivialis, and there aren't many courses that have pure Poa Trivialis in terms of greens. Here, La Quinta, there might be one more. I mean, pure Poa Trivialis is pretty rare. Most of the time, Poa Trivialis has this rye overseed. Now, in the fairways, we've got rye and fescue. Rough is rye and fescue, but you see it's only kept at 2 inches long, so it's not all that thick. It's not all that deep, and honestly, it's not all that difficult to play out of. So the key takeaways for TPC Scottsdale, it's a par 71, a fairly long par 71, but we aren't going to be looking at any long course filters, but right under 7,300 yards in terms of yardage. Large greens, 7,000 square feet. A number of holes of water in play. There's 6, so water does come into play here. It is a Tom Weiskopf design and renovation. He does have his hands on a few courses if you want to look on your own time in terms of research, the courses that are Tom Weiskopf designs. And then lastly, as of now, we're going to be looking at Poa Trivialis and rye overseed. There is a chance we'll just be looking at Poa Trivialis. But anyway, there is last year's tournament fact sheet. Again, apologies, the GCSA has not put this year's tournament fact sheet out for Phoenix. All right, so we move to this year's field, at least players that have committed. So there has been one field change. The one player who has withdrawn is Davis Riley. You see, he has not played very well recently, all the way down near the bottom in terms of strokes gained total. Davis Riley is not in the field this week, and Ryan Fox was the first alternate. So Ryan Fox is now officially in the field. There you go. There he is. But anyway, in terms of players who have committed so far to playing at the WMPO, you'll often hear that as the shortened version, the moniker, the the name just escaped me. The abbreviation, if you will, WMPO. Players who have committed this year so far: Victor Hovland, Scotty Scheffler is your 2-time defending champion at TPC Scottsdale. Eric Cole, Xander, Max Homa, Minwoo Lee, Brian Harmon, Adam Scott, Ben On, Shane Lowry, Sung Jae. So a pretty big field. Tom Kim, just saw him at the bottom of the screen there. Wyndham Clark as well. Sahith Theegala, Sam Burns. Pretty big field. Pretty big name field for not being a signature event. A lot of the bigger name players, have committed to playing the Waste Management this year. And of course, you can see there the top 10 in terms of total performance the last 36 rounds. Again, no short course or long course. I'm going to tell you there's probably not going to be any scoring relative to par, but just to make sure, why don't we go ahead and jump into the course breakdown here in Fantasy National. TPC Scottsdale, you have some challenging holes around TPC Scottsdale. mainly the par 4 11th plays to almost a couple of tenths of a shot over par. You got a 10th over par, 10th over par. Let's see, where's the second? Yeah, another 10th over par. So bogeys can creep up and get you, and even on the 11th, a double bogey can come up and get you. And there are plenty of scoring opportunities as well. The par 5 third plays to a little more than a third of a shot under par. The easiest hole, the par 5 13th, plays to almost a half a shot under par. Quarter of a shot. The drivable par 4, and this is a drivable par 4, plays to a quarter of a shot under par. So opportunities to go low, opportunities to ruin your scorecard abound at TPC Scottsdale. In fact, if we look at the 9th and 10th most difficult holes, the 9th and the 10th both slightly over par. In fact, the 10th most difficult, there it is. 10th most difficult at 200ths over par, and the 11th most difficult, 200ths under par. So you're looking at about an average difficulty course based on just where par falls on the scorecard. It would lean to the difficult. That's actually slightly misleading. It's going to lean a little bit to the easier end, depending on the weather and other factors, but generally leans a little bit easy. But overall, we're looking about an average difficulty tournament. Moving into the strokes gained by shot type per round, you see approach and putting very, very nearly the same. Almost 8/10 of a shot. I mean, they're almost identical. The difference is, and why this is a ball striking course, a lot of professionals have even talked about this. This is quickly becoming a first shot type of event or course with the altitude that Scottsdale sits at, the run out, and of course with the water that are in some areas off the tee. Off the tee becomes fairly important. You see that here in the top 10s. We move to the top 5s. You know, the off the tee is still gaining in relation to around the green. Approach and putting are still pretty neck and neck, although the putting does take over the approach in terms of the top 5s. And then for your winners, a lot more of the same. And look how important this off the tee is for not only your top 10s, your top 5s, but I mean really drastically a big factor for your winners. And your winners, it has become a ball striking tournament. Hence, Scotty Scheffler being your 2-time champion. Former winners here include Brooks Koepka twice. Webb Simpson, not necessarily known for his off the tee game, but certainly a ball striker in his younger days. Gary Woodland, also a former winner here. Ricky Fowler, a former winner here. So ball striking and off the tee game, a major factor this week, along with, as usual, if you're winning tournaments, you're going to be putting pretty well, you would think. All right, moving into average strokes gained by hole by par. As you would think, for most professional tournaments, the pros are going to be taking advantage of the par 5s. Even though there are only 3 of them here at TPC Scottsdale, they're still getting taken advantage of. The par 4s are outweighing the par 3s fairly handily. We look into the top 5s, much more the same. The 5s start to lengthen their advantage or strokes gained that the pros are gaining on them over the 4s and the 3s. And then for your winners, it's all in the par 5s and the par 4s. Par 3s really lag behind here. Even though there are still your full allotment of 4 par 3s, 1, 2, 3, and 4, they generally aren't the hardest holes on the course, save for the par 3 7th. Plays to a 10th of a shot over par. But otherwise, you got a par 3 that plays under par, a 10th over, and a couple of hundredths under. Whereas somewhere like the American Express, all of those courses, the Stadium course, La Quinta, and the Nicklaus Tournament course, all three of those courses, the most difficult holes were the par threes. Not the case here at TPC Scottsdale. Not the case. So, not sure how much par threes are really going to factor this week. At least early on in our research here, they don't look like they're going to matter a whole lot. Hole composition. There is one short par 3, a couple of mid-length par 3s, and a long par 3 at 215. A drivable par 4 that's 332, and that's a little bit misleading as this hole, you don't have to carry it that entire way to drive the green. Again, these greens are fairly large, so there is quite a bit of risk-reward on that par 4 17th at 332, water on the left, etc. But the majority of your par 4s fall between 400 and 500, none over 500 plus. So you have an even distribution or an even number of par 4s measuring from 400 to 450 and 450 to 5. So we'll go into the data or dig deep into the data tomorrow for the Data Dive show, figure out if there's a particular range of these that matter more. And you see all three par 5s measure from 550 to 600. So we like to talk about trying to narrow in on a specific range during Monday night's shows. Looks like this might be done for us. We might be just looking at 550 to 600 par 3s all week, especially since for the winners, the par 5s are the most important. I mean, the top 10s, par 5s are most important. So looking like we're going to be focused just on this length of par 5s. Moving into approach shot distribution, the majority of approach shots here come from 150 to 175 at the course and in relation to the average tour event. So again, when we go into the data a little bit tonight, but more so tomorrow in the prior leaderboards and in Microsoft Excel with TPC Scottsdale data directly, we'll see if that range really does factor in the most. Historic cut line here has hovered, right around even par. Last year played to +1. It's been -1. It's been as low as -3 before, which would put it in the extremely easy. It's also been difficult. It's played to +4 at times and +2, but generally, hovers right in this even par area. So again, the emphasis on being about an average difficulty tournament. Scoring distribution now, you do have several birdie opportunities here. So that's why you see a heavy prevalence of birdies as opposed to the bogeys. 20% birdies. Bogeys are at about 15% or a little bit less. And this is why I was saying that looking at that scorecard was slightly misleading in terms of only looking at where par is, because generally it does tend to be easier than it does difficult, and that's why you see the more scores under par. But there are a few doubles that can come up and get you, and the Eagles bar pretty non-existent here. Pretty non-existent. Driving accuracy. Again, these fairways can get difficult to hit, especially late in the round or in the course. 18 is a very difficult driving hole. 17, players can lose the fairway, get a penalty stroke. Sometimes they don't really care. They just want to kind of drop by the green. So there's a little bit of strategy there. Overall driving accuracy, a little bit less than 60%, and certainly less than the average tour event. Green and regulation percentage, however, is much higher here. That's thanks to a couple of combination of factors, mainly that the greens are so large, 7,000 square feet. Scrambling, again, speaking to the rough and not being punitive, scrambling percentage is higher here than it is at the average tour event. 3 putts per round, however, right about the average tour event. You can thank that to a couple of things. Perhaps players aren't familiar with Poa Trivialis. Considering we're on a West Coast swing, it's been mostly Poa Annua and a lot of Poa Annua, maybe a little bit of pure Bermuda. So perhaps a little bit of unfamiliarity or a little bit of rusty on Poa Trivialis, and again the size of the greens being rather large, 3 putts per round, about average here. Now the big thing, driving distance much higher here. Again, a couple of combinations of factors. One, the elevation of Scottsdale helps with that, and players just aren't afraid to be in the rough. They do back it off a little bit on the holes with water in play, but the rough is not very difficult, and so they aren't afraid to lose a drive too much to gain some distance. Proximity, again, just thanks to the size of the greens, much further away here than the average tour event. So there's a look at TPC Scottsdale from a scorecard and graphical view. Before we go back to the players' page view, let's take a look at the historic conditions for the WMPO. Now, you see a couple of rounds that were average last year. You can thank the wind for that. They really had to back off the green speeds a little bit. They're always generally pretty firm. But these are the only 2 years it's played to average in terms of speed. Almost every other round, in fact, every other round, going back to the renovation, has been fast. So I think it's safe to say that they're wanting to put these greens at fast, or to keep them fast. But the scoring has been generally about average. I mean, again, with the wind that was very prevalent in the opening round last year, it did play difficult. You will get rounds that are easy, especially in calm winds, but generally mostly plays to about average, with your exceptions here and there for certain rounds, but most of the time we'll play to average. And of course, these are Bermuda based, but we're going to be looking at Poa Trivialis overseeded courses here in a moment for putting. So not too worried about the greens there. So there's a look at the prior course conditions, why I'm not looking at any scoring filter, at least this evening. When we look at Wind Finder starting tomorrow, maybe that will change. You know, if it's supposed to be really calm all week, you know, we might want to consider easy relative to par. If the wind's really supposed to pick up, we might want to consider difficult. But for this evening, I'm not looking at a scoring filter. All right, let's come back into the player page view for this week. We saw just how important off the tee is here at TPC Scottsdale. So in the past 36 rounds, your top off the tee players have been Scotty Scheffler, Ben On, Kevin Yu, Victor Hovland, Tyler Duncan, Doug Gim, Cam Champ, Keith Mitchell, Johnny Vegas, and Corey Connors in your past 36 rounds and or 12 months. Not to ignore the strokes gained approach, your top iron players, Scotty Scheffler, Lucas Glover, Xander, Sam Ryder, Gary Woodland, Mark Hubbard, Hideki, Eric Cole, Victor Hovland, and Ches Reavie are your top 10 strokes gained approach players. Now, you'll have to give me a moment. I'm going to have to filter on the courses that have Poa Trivialis. So the first, and most of these are Bermuda base courses with Poa Trivialis overseed. So again, it's very, very likely, or it's possible, I should say, that we are going to really narrow this down tomorrow if the GCSAA tournament fact sheet does indeed list this as pure Poa Trivialis. But anyway, courses that are Bermuda-based Poa Trivialis overseed: Harbortown, host of the RBC Heritage. You have Innisbrook, host of the Valspar, very difficult test of golf there. Quail Hollow, host of the Wells Fargo, very long, very difficult. I believe it's this top one. The Stadium course, where we were a couple of weeks ago for the championship of the American Express. TPC San Antonio, where we'll be the week before the Masters for the Valero. TPC San Antonio. TPC Sawgrass and of course TPC Scottsdale. So with those courses in the data set, we're going to go back 2 years. It's the furthest back now that we can go with Fantasy Nationals overhaul. But even so, there are a handful of players that do have 36 rounds in terms of putting. Most players have, into the teens, maybe 20. So I feel like this probably is a decent sample size. I still would like to have gone back the full 5 years. Things that are just out of my control now. But on courses that are specifically Bermuda Base, POA Trivialis Overseed, your top putters the past 2 years or 36 rounds, those players have been... I just realized that that's getting cut off. You can see the ordering, but you can't see the ranking. Your top putters on POA Trivialis Overseeded Greens the past 2 years: Matt Kuchar, Sam Ryder, Taylor Montgomery, Sam Burns, Brendan Todd, Alex Noren, Justin Suh, Chad Ramey, Billy Horschel, and Minwoo Lee. Minwoo Lee clearly the lowest in terms of number of rounds. The American Express, which we still haven't gotten the data for, he's actually gained on every single one of these rounds, with the exception of the RBC Heritage. He's gained strokes at these, or in these rounds, on these POA Trivialis overseeded rounds. So important to note. Small sample size, but he's been very good at them. There's your top 10 putters on POA Trivialis overseeded greens. All right. Last thing that we're going to take a look at in terms of a high-level overview before we get into a little bit more specifics. We've seen just how important the par 5s are when we went into the course breakdown, and all 3 par 3s here at TPC Scottsdale measure 550 to 600. So your top par 5 performers from 550 to 600 yards that are in the field so far this week for the WMPO: Jordan Spieth, Ricky Fowler, Aaron Rai, Lee Hodges, Davis Thompson, Doug Gim, Thomas Dietrich, Max Homa, Ben Griffin, and Wyndham Clark. All right, with that, let's go ahead and move to the tournament history tab, strokes gained total, page view, however you want to think about it. The players who have played the best the past 5 years here at TPC Scottsdale. You have Justin Thomas is your number 1 strokes gained total player. Has not won in the past 5 years, but you see 3 top 5 finishes, another top 10, and another top 15. He has loved playing at TPC Scottsdale in the past. Same with Xander. Xander's got a runner-up, a third, a couple other top 10s, and a top 20. Of course, Scotty Scheffler is your 2-time defending champion here at TPC Scottsdale. Also has another top 10. He did miss the cut his first try at TPC Scottsdale. Hideki is 5 for 5. Sungjae is 4 for 4. Max Homa is 5 for 5. Ricky Fowler, winner in 2019. Pretty hit and miss. Granted, this is when he was at the height of his struggles. But top 10 last year. Again, a former champion. He's played pretty well here. Billy Horschel's 5 for 5. He does have more middling to poor finishes, but still has a couple of top 10s. Matt Kuchar generally plays well here. Adam Hadwin has played well here. So there's a look at some of the players who have played particularly well the past 5 years here at TPC Scottsdale. The other end of the spectrum, players who haven't. For as much as off the tee is a big factor this week, Cameron Champ, only 1 for 3. Adam Schenk is 2 for 5. Did top 25 last year, but had a pretty poor run before that. Tyler Duncan, 0 for 5. Joel Damon, 2 for 4 with a withdrawal. Ryan Moore, 1 for 5. Look here, Stuart Sink is 4 for 4, making the cut. 4 for 4. Everything has been pretty poor, though. Best finish of a T43. He's not particularly played well. Troy Merritt, 1 for 4. Harris English, 1 for 4. Luke Donald's 0 for 3. Brent Snedeker 1 for 3. Denny McCarthy 3 for 5. Again, highlighting the emphasis of off the tee that it's not Denny McCarthy's game. So he's played poorly here. There's a look at the players who haven't played well at TPC Scottsdale the past 5 years. All right, with that, that's a pretty good segue. We're going to go to Microsoft Excel. Let's bring up the comparison course chart. Look at TPC Scottsdale and the Waste Management Phoenix Open compared to other courses on the PGA Tour, or full field courses, I should say. Right off the bat, Phoenix, 33% more important off the tee than the other, or than the full field course average on the PGA Tour. Off the tee is just a really, really big factor here. It's one of the biggest on the PGA Tour now. Barbasol, quite later in the season, is a massive ball strikers fest. Very, very easy course. But TPC Scottsdale's on par. It's actually more important than the Wells Fargo and how much that place is a ball strikers haven. The John Deere, how easy that is, but that generally rewards driving the golf ball. Look at Arnold Palmer, 24% more important. Phoenix is 33% more important. So just heavy, heavy, heavy emphasis off the tee. Now, the around the green is showing that it is 18% more important. I think this is a bit misleading because around the green generally doesn't factor in at a lot of places except for a few spots like Pebble Beach this week. It's a big factor at the Valero, the Wells Fargo, since it's very long, very difficult. The Memorial is a big around the green type tournament, long and difficult. So as much as Phoenix is showing 18%, I wouldn't get too hung up with this. I am more so focused on the off the tee. Going into the distance and the greens, look, distance also a big factor. 52.5% more important than the average full field course on the PGA Tour. Right in line with the Genesis. You see just how much distance is a factor at the Arnold Palmer, places like Puerto Rico that are long courses. Vedanta, a very, very long course. You got to have distance to contend there. But not to be overshadowed, distance is a pretty big factor here at Phoenix. Fairways, not so much, just because the rough isn't difficult to play out of. Players aren't afraid to play from the rough. Greens, also, I don't think are going to be a big factor because these greens are large. They're fairly easy to hit. So I'm looking at distance early on this week in terms of driving and greens. We go into scoring. Pretty even, pretty close between the birdies and the bogeys. So I will be interested. Going to do a lot of scrutiny tomorrow, looking at the prior leaderboards, figure out if it's birdies gained, if it's bogey avoidance. Maybe it's neither. Maybe we're looking at opportunities gained, perhaps. Could be one of the several things, but we'll definitely be going into that tomorrow. Right now, it looks like the slightest of favor to birdies gained, but I'm not too terribly confident in that. Looking at par threes, look, we saw this in the course breakdown, saw it in the scorecard. Like they just don't really matter. Not a whole lot. 14% less important than the average full field course. Now, this one particular range is highlighting or getting highlighted 22.5%. When we go into the detail tomorrow, we'll see if perhaps this range is garnering majority of the strokes gained, and we just look at this range of par threes. It's very possible. All right, par fours, slightly favored. And as I was talking about, since there are 5 par fours from 400 to 450 and 5 from 450 to 5, we'll really dig into this tomorrow on the Data Dive show, but at least in our initial look, 450 to 5s look very important, and the 400 to 450s don't. So at least based on limited data tonight, or a limited look at the data, you would want to focus on the 450 to 5s tonight and going into tomorrow for your research. And then lastly, par 5s. Par 5s in total, not all that important, but look at the range. All 3 par 5s fall to this range at TPC Scottsdale, 40% more important. We're going to be just looking at that range all week. Lastly, let's take a look at proximity. Total prox does make some sense with these large greens. If you're closer to the hole, obvious statements are obvious. You're going to have a better chance to score. Prox total looks like it could be a factor. In fact, all of these ranges, all of these ranges are above the full field PGA course average. So when we go into the prior leaderboards, we'll figure out if there is a range we want to focus on. Perhaps it's just total prox. Just as a reminder, the majority of approach shots at TPC Scottsdale and in relation to the PGA Tour come from 150 to 175. So there's a look at TPC Scottsdale and WMPO compared to other full field courses on the PGA Tour. We're going to round the show out as we do every Sunday with the early look file. This is another way to look at the Strokes Gained total page view, or the tournament history page view in Fantasy National. This is taking that data and breaking it out the last 5 years, performance specifically at TPC Scottsdale. So I'm going to filter out the players who have only played it once. I want to see players who have consistently, year over year, played TPC Scottsdale, what they have done well. And you see, off the tee. We'll go to the players that have averaged a top, that's only 12. Yeah, that's okay. Players who have averaged top 30 in the past 5 years. Look at this heavy allotment of green off the tee here. Just a huge amount of performance here. This is a 1.5 for your off the tee. The approach, 1.8. Mainly highlighted by Justin Thomas. If you take him out, players that have averaged a top 30, that falls to a 1.6, so right in line with off the tee. But approach is not to be ignored here. This is a ball striker's place. As much as I thought around the green would not be a factor, a lot of these players that have performed well year over year have been very good around the green. So perhaps that's something that I need to change in my thought process moving forward this week with TPC Scottsdale. Hard to ignore, there's a lot of green here. This is actually the highest of the numbers so far between off the tee, around the green, and approach. And then putting, if you're playing well, you're generally expected to make putts. So good deal in each of these. It's pretty balanced. My eyes are just drawn to this heavy green with 4 of the top 5 players the past 5 years here in terms of off the tee. But it's you can't ignore the around the green. The players have performed well around the green here, and a little bit of putting as well. All right, moving into distance. Yeah, Sahith Theegala is a little bit negative in terms of distance. Bud Cauley, Billy Horschel's not long by any means, but this is still a pretty respectable number in terms of the average. You see Xander moving it. Vegas, that's his big thing. He is long off the tee. And Justin Thomas and Scotty, Hideki and Homa, they can move it. Ben On moves it off the tee. And these guys have historically played very, very well here at TPC Scottsdale. Good drives gained is a little bit. You have a little bit here. And you have a little bit in the greens as well. But I'm mainly focused on the distance. Moving into scoring. With the players that have averaged a top 30, This is a 3.2. That's very high. This is a 2.8. So again, just like we saw in the comparison chart over here in the scoring, the birdies seem to be a slight favor over the bogey avoidance. Birdies gained for the top 30 is a 3.2. This is a 2.8. Again, it's very, very close, but slight lean into the birdies. We're going to skip the par 3s. Again, they just don't seem to be all that important. We'll look at the par 4s. Yeah, I mean, look at that heavy concentration of green again in these 450 to 5 par 4, 450 to 5 par 4s. You do have one player negative. Bud Cauley hasn't played them well, but Ben On has played them well. This is a 2.0. This is a 1.6. Even though not a single player is negative in 400, 450, it's still lower in terms of the average strokes gained than the 450 to 5. And that's why I think 450 to 5 is probably the range we're going to focus on this week. You're going to have to play both of these ranges well. Don't get me wrong. You're going to have to play both of these well. So this, like I was mentioning last week in terms of the mixed condition model with the Pebble Beach, and you could have made an argument to look at two ranges of par 4s. There's really a pretty good argument just to look at these two ranges of par 4s this week. Yes, you do have the drivable par 4 17th. It's only one hole. It's only going to be played 4 times max, whereas you're going to have 40 par 4s on the week played to these ranges. Very well could be looking at 400 to 500 par 4s. Par 5s, again, all of it's just kind of in the 550 to 600. I mean, like Bud Cauley, he's been negative at when they do get shortened. But all three of them fall into here. The majority of your strokes gained for par 4s are falling into here. 3.6 of 4.1, 2 of 2.1, like 2.5 of 2.3. Majority of your strokes gained are coming into this range, so all of the par 5 are in the 550 to 6. And then I do want to look at some proximity just very quickly. The majority of the approach shots come from here. I don't see anything that jumps off the bat immediately. Total procs, or at least in that range, total procs does look somewhat correlating. So I'll be intrigued to go into the prior leaderboards tomorrow, look into the proximities, because that does look fairly strong. Sungjae and Johnny Vegas, slightly negative. Fitzpatrick and Tagala a little bit worse, but you've got a heavy concentration of green here in the 125 to 150. Heavy concentration of green in the 100 to 125, which would make some sense for the very short par 4s, the 350 to 4s, or excuse me, the 400 to 450s with the altitude and stuff. So interesting. But that's a look at the players who have performed the best the past 5 years, what they've been doing. I'll bring back everybody that has played, sorted on a best average finish. That's going to be it for the show this evening. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, watching, listening, supporting the channel by liking the video, commenting and subscribing. I always appreciate it. In the comments, let me know how your Pebble Beach is going. Do you have Wyndham Clark? Do you have Ludwig Aubert or another chaser? Hoping to get a full day in tomorrow to not have it revert back to a 54-hole finish. How's your DFS going for Pebble Beach? And then what are you focused on early on in your research for Phoenix? Would be interested to hear from you all on that. Of course, reach out in the comments or on social media if you are a winner, if you've had big wins and want the community to know. I would love to be able to shout out members of the community who are having success. Doesn't have to be in fantasy golf. Maybe you played Live, Fantasy DFS Live this past weekend with Joaquin Neiman's playoff win over Sergio. Maybe it's in fantasy basketball. Not anything going on in fantasy football, but throw it in the comments. Who do you have for the Super Bowl? Chiefs or Niners. We'd love to hear from you all in that regard as well. But thanks for tuning in and supporting the channel. Always appreciate it. For all of the wagers you have made this past week for the Pebble Beach, for all of the contests you played this past week for the Pebble Beach, and until I see you tomorrow for the Data Dive Show, may all your bets be profitable.